Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, debunking mythology. Sattology means science of truth or study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means science or study of fake, lie, or imagination. We bring you so many different varied topics, which are sometimes I have an expertise in that, sometimes others have an expertise in that. And people who come here, you've heard some very good discussions in the last 2, 3 days. Today is going to be a different topic. But one thing I must say, those of you who have not signed up for the courses, do sign up on Twitter or on Facebook or in the campuses. These links have been shared. So there are separate links for all of those places and you can do that. So let us welcome Sri Ankit Shah, who is a chartered accountant and he's an analyst, wonderful analyst. He predicts a lot of things.
Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar.
Namaskar.
Welcome. Welcome to the show. So Ankit, now a lot of things have happened between last time and today. Now US has a speaker, formal speaker, and that too is from an opposite camp of Biden. And the economy is already now the mainstream analysts now in US are talking about 2023. And so all the New Year celebrations have gone, all holidays have gone. Now it's time for real work. So, according to you, how do you analyze today's situation of US?
So, a lot of economics in terms of, macroeconomic moves that the United States government does and balances along with the US Treasury and the Federal Reserve over the years have been a hodgepodge job. I mean, just like, if you talk about diplomats world over, they will say that the United States policy is pretty transactional in nature. You cannot have a long-term relationship or a long-term commitment in terms of anything that the United States would promise in terms of relationship to the nations. Something similar happens in the lines in terms of economics as well, because you see that in order to keep the US dollar as the fiat reserve currency model all over the world, what has happened in the last 50 years is that we see an internal cycle of quantitative tightening and quantitative easing. These cycles go on within United States, and these cycles determine a lot of fate for the rest of the world, because rest of the countries, any country who's not going to be able to buy energy in their own currency automatically becomes a financial colony for the United States. And that is what we have seen in the last 40, 50 years. So, in order to balance out when the rest of the world parks its savings in the United States dollar, United States stocks and treasury, what happens is that United States also have to do some kind of a cycle. And that is what the quantitative easing and the quantitative tightening is all about. So this hodgepodge goes on along with the investments and the savings parkings which the rest of the world do, and that cycle is what we call as the United States Treasury and the United States dollar. So it's a reflection of USD investments and withdrawals, which determine the cycles of quantitative easing and quantitative tightening within United States for the purpose of the internal economy. Which is why you see, if you analyze the last 2 years, especially after Biden took office, you will realize that anything which the Federal Reserve comes and talks about. I mean, if I'm talking about Jerome Powell, because he is in office, so anything that he is going to talk about, there is no kind of sense of stability with what he says. I mean, 2 years back, if you just look at all the Fed meeting outcomes of the Fed meeting in terms of the statements that they give after the Fed meetings, if you check out 2021, you will find Jerome Powell saying, "Oh no, the inflation won't come." From there, it traveled to a little bit of inflation might come. Oh no, there is no recession now, a little bit of recession might come. So this hodgepodge goes on and on, which is why their policy also flip flops. Oh no, we will stop increasing the interest rates. We will be pivoting. So this is exactly what we have seen over the years that is happening, especially after the Biden term. The flip flops have increased, not in terms of short term and medium term policies, but even long term policies. I mean, there is no end to the kind of financial collapse that is coming towards. So viewers must visit my handle, which is visible on the screen right now, you will find a whole chunk of information on how uh, the countries of the world are proceeding with the de-dollarization. And this politics, which has recently turned in the last week in terms of the speaker selection, is what I see it as a hodgepodge in terms of when exactly the collapse should begin. I think that is the internal churn between the whoever the powers to be in the United States, who are the main decision makers, who are leading this governance model. I think that's where their confusion lies in terms of when exactly the collapse should begin. And when I'm talking about collapse, what I mean is that the accumulated reserve currency status bubble in the US stocks, bonds, and derivatives, when exactly they are going to prick that bubble balloon with a needle. That's what I mean when I say the confusion is about when they want to burst this bubble and start the collapse. So that's where it is.
The US stock market is already down. So down. And like since 2020, people have now, they're just, I mean, they can't make money over stock market. It's already going, every day is down, actually. Now, coming to this one, what will be the impact? What is the, we already, you study from macroeconomic perspective also. So what is this Russia-Ukraine conflict impact is coming on, which is also defining this aspect, the the uh, de-dollarization or mostly the Fed collapse generally.
Mhm. So I see the Russia-Ukraine conflict specifically from the perspective of de-dollarization. I see it as US military talking to the United States governments that we won't be able to launch a military conflict to stop de-dollarization. We do not want to do any actual real war with any of the BRICS nations who are trying to make a currency which is going to be a pegged currency to replace dollar. I think that what the message exactly is with this Ukraine conflict, that let's cook up a conflict which is fake. And why would I call it fake? Because real wars do not extend like this, like a chewing gum, right? So, when you're selling this idea to the world, especially to your population, that you know we are going to bring down Putin, Russia is at problem. I mean, in social media, Aditya ji, I would really say you this, that in social media Russia is losing, but in the real war that's not what has happened, right? So so when the intent is that you are not going to send boots on ground, the intent when you are only doing defense deals and helping European allies and pocketing those dollars back into your pockets of the deep state companies, the intent when you say that you are going to collapse an energy producer giant like Russia, nobody is going to buy that idea. And I'll tell you why. Because when you stretch the war script like this by not actively participating in the conflict, what that goes to show is your intent is not to bring down the Russian regime, but your intent is actually to bring down maybe probably 5, 7, 10 energy consuming nations rather than energy producing nations, which are your own allies, by the way. And six governments since the beginning of the Ukraine conflict has gone down in the West. So the Putin is as it is where he is. So all those social media warriors who are under this illusion, which is sold to them, packaged and sold to them, that Russia is going to lose, I don't think so. I probably see that the script is actually given by the US deep state to the Russian president to go on with this stretching scheme, so that US does not need to have a war with any of the nuclear powers to stop de-dollarization. I believe a major faction is in the United States agreeing to the collapse of the fiat dollar.
If you look at the political discourse in the US, is all about the southern border, that how to stop the immigrants coming in, and almost 5 million have come in. 5 million. People will not say official numbers because it's very huge. It's like a bigger than most of the
Mhm,
cities of the US. Even the
mhm.
San Diego County had 3.5 million people only. So just imagine more people than that have crossed the border. That's what they say. So are these all diversionary tactics? Like these are, according to you, what you analyze from there?
So it is very surprising when a Democrat government talks about border control. It really surprises. And this has not come just as a single, a policy statement. This has come with real intent. And, somewhere in the Trump or the Republican camp, they might be thinking, oh my God, this is our policy. I mean, they are taking our policy or what? So, and this has come not standalone. The other statement, Aditya ji, which came at the beginning of 2023 was, let's make 2023 the year of consuming made in America. I mean, I don't know what he means by made in America. It doesn't exist, right? But that's what he said. So I look at it, both these statements, as the reversal of the dollarization which began in 1971. I'll take you to 1973 when Nixon started reapproachment with China, after which, from 1973, the momentum of US China trade began to boom. So, the reversal of that is this admission or this statement that let's begin manufacturing at least something home. So that 50 years reversal is nothing but dollarization and de-dollarization. So I think this Democrat government is serious when Biden is talking about. So, I mean, he's obviously getting notes from wherever that he's getting from the deep state actors or whoever the powers be. But I think it's real when he's saying that, because that's what de-dollarization exactly means, that Asia is no more going to export you, so you'll have to manufacture home. Same thing goes with the southern border point, Aditya ji, which you raised. From 1973, the borders started becoming porous in the United States because they wanted the Mexican and the illegal labor coming in, cheap labor coming in from the south. Also, this had to do a lot with some role of church and missionaries who wanted the humanitarian aid contracts and those kind of illicit funding and rehabilitation funding, etc. But it was majorly about Americans not manufacturing anything home or doing any kind of a labor job, which is why these things happened in 1973 with the beginning of dollarization, of fiat dollarization of the world, where they started rapprochement with China for the cheap manufacturing, and they opened up the borders at the south, or made it porous, whatever you call it in your terms, so that some illegal laborers would enter, and then they will have cheap labor for the companies, and Americans won't have to do those kind of low level tasks. So both these reversals coming in 2023, it exactly goes with my book, which is coming on, which has a chapter on the dollar of war, talking about this entire de-dollarization cycle reversing completely. So I believe what Biden is saying, both these statements, that let's begin manufacturing home, and the border control, where he's saying that now you might enter United States, but it's going to be through legal means. That is, I think he's put some cap of 30,000 per month, something like that. Let the policy come out, but I think the United States is serious about it, and both of these were actually the Republican agenda, basically, frankly speaking. But the demo coming from a Democrat government, it is a surprise, but it is not a surprise because looking at the connection it has with the de-dollarization that is going on. So it's a complete reversal of 1973, beginning from 2023, that we see that United States now wants to manufacture home, and the borders would be actually be having some kind of a real security in terms of no illegals would be allowed. I mean, legal immigration would be is the way forward that the government is looking at.
It's so shocking that now even the mainstream media, which I don't trust even a bit of United States, I don't trust mainstream media in any part of the world, but especially US. US is all propaganda, mostly propaganda. And there in the mainstream media now, de-dollarization is coming. Like yesterday, I was hearing one of the shows, and he was saying that de-dollarization, and they mentioned India as one of the leaders of de-dollarization. They didn't mention China, they didn't mention Russia, they just mentioned India as a leader. I
Mhm.
was surprised with that comment actually. So why they must be talking? Because these guys get reading points. Somebody from the back gives them that this is what you need to communicate today. These are all news performers, actors, news actors. That it should be another stream. They're mainstream news actors. They are just pretend like the same guy will be telling you a story about earthquake, and then 2 minutes second he'll talk about economy now. and and then in the same show he'll go to Ukraine war. So so anyway, and these are very fancy newsreaders. I call them newsreader, but they're no longer, they're performers. So now it's coming in the mainstream. So why would they mention India is the leader?
Adityaji, I seriously believe that India is the leader of de-dollarization, and it makes sense with the kind of moves that we have seen from 2016 onwards. I think 2018 was the first time when India opened its cards and asked China, because India understood that China is going to be the main player if we want to have some concrete kind of a de-dollarization. So it opened its cards to China and offered them trade in national currencies. But China in 2018 rejected that. Uh, I see it. I see that rejection particularly because the Chinese Communist Party had back then had very strong ties with the U.S. deep state in terms of this entire manufacturing and supply chain and whatnot. Um, but at that point in time, in 2018, UAE, Iran, and Russia, all three agreed to this Indian offer, right? So I believe India took the lead. While it is very obvious that any country who would want to go towards the path of de-dollarization, they need to accumulate gold and silver as precious metals, which China, Russia, and India have been doing. I mean, from 2015-16 onwards, on a good scale in a decent amount. But the second move was shifting the trade to national currencies, shifting bilateral trade to national currencies. I think this is where, Russia and China had probably no clue. So I think it was India who took the leadership of the de-dollarization process altogether, and which is why today we have the first mover advantage, because right now the UPI, the RuPay card, and the technology which is developing this, alternate to the SWIFT payment mechanism, it's the Indian technology which is spreading. All right, it's not Chinese technology. Nobody is talking about the electronic yuan, e-yuan. Nobody is talking about the Russian mir payment system. It's, I mean, most of the world is talking about the Indian payment systems, which is UPI and the RuPay card, and there are now 35 nations lining up for it, which means that it is true that it's India who started de-dollarization. It's not Russia and China. Russia and China were just, you know, I would say, consent on accumulating gold and silver. That was a common thing among all the nations, not just Russia, China, and India, that you need to accumulate gold and silver as precious metals in central banks' reserves to replace the US dollar. But the first step, which is cutting out all the multilateral trade deals, which involves more than two nations with United States dollar, I think that was an Indian step. So this entire leadership of de-dollarization is Indian. It's not Russian or Chinese.
You know, very interesting thing you said just now. And people, if they follow his Twitter handle, which is on his signature, you can see there, you can follow him there, and they can comment on his Twitter. He is very informative, and he's the only retweets we do the maximum. So you can see on Sattology also if anyone wants to do, but follow his handle directly. One thing which comes in the mind, like where India has done some remarkable futuristic thinking to save themselves. But the second thing is also gradually, I see that more and more Americans are seeing India as a threat. I'm not talking about American citizens, I'm talking about American government seeing India as a threat. And to contain it, they want to tie it down with different defense pacts. Because at the end of the day, that is the top of their mind, that the defense, that if nothing works, then our armies will work. And you just mentioned that US Army doesn't want to fight. And so this is what on their mind. And we see that more and more restrictions coming on. But Google chief went to India and spoke about, I think Microsoft and Google both, they spoke about Google lock system or some data lock system, which is the Indian government very agreed to that. Why would the Indian government do that when they are doing, we're taking these steps on financial side?
So, Adityaji, you need to understand that when the fish is entering the trap, you're not going to stop the fish, right? So it's not just about Google or Microsoft. We have Airbus, we have Boeing, we have Raytheon, we have General Electric, right? General Atomics. All these United States biggies companies are not just tying up. To my knowledge and my understanding of geopolitics, these companies are actually going to settle in India by the end of this decade, and it makes sense in terms, not just in terms of profits of business, but it makes sense in every perspective, in terms of, you say, the value systems between the population of the two countries, the kind of cooperation which is possible between the population of two countries and the government going down, I mean, one decade down. I think looking at all of that, these companies are very much interested. I mean, just I was just looking at a new policy wherein, Oxford, Harvard, all these big Ivy League colleges are now to be allowed opening up campuses. Not just being allowed to opening up campuses in India, but they are also being allowed to have their own system of assessments for exams, and a freedom to issue certificates in terms of courses, certificates and degrees in terms of courses equivalent to the Indian education system. So I look at it as, a lot of cream American knowledge systems shifting towards India, shifting and going to settle in India by the end of this decade. And this was very obvious because India has always been the hub of education, and this is not something new. I mean, ancient India had this university campuses in the mandirs, in the temple campuses, where, the foreign students would die in their way to travel to seek admission, getting filtered out and getting admission in in Indian universities. So this is not something which is what we are seeing as new, but this is where it is heading towards. Certainly heading towards. There's no doubt about it. None of the American or the Western, uh, would I say, a cream institute of repute would have that kind of reception or that kind of acceptability in any other geography other than Indian. Which is, and this is not just about acceptability, it's also about what kind of future collaboration that is possible along with the Indian populace, which is the youngest population in the world right now. I mean, the next 3 decades, we are going to become the richest economy in the world. We are going to sit back on the throne, as I say. 2047 is our year. We are going to sit back on the throne which always belonged to us. For 1700 years, it had been the case. So, who will not be interested when, especially when, you see the Western countries are aging. They do not have younger working population anymore. So, where are they going to invest? It's obviously India.
2047 is a magical number. Everyone is talking about 2047. I don't know what is there. It's like Paramatma talking to everyone about 2047. Somebody is predicting a war in 2047 between US and India. Somebody is predicting it's 2047 is a magical number. And you said it's the whole thing is going to get centered in India again. Now, one question which comes in, it has come from the audience actually, is coming in that when the Anglo-American education system, all the world's, including Indian professors, they run to the West to seek validation. And what they teach in the mainstream American Indian education is Western European version of the education history. And India has doesn't have a their own version. Indian academics are mostly the copycat champions, not all of them, but some of them. But I'm talking about the who are employed by the university systems. They copy the researches and produce them, and I've seen
Mhm.
many of the papers also, and quoting Western authors all the time. So the West is always attempted for global homogenization. The only
Mhm.
country which stands against it intellectually, which is, and people only, not even the systems. Indian systems are very pro-Western, all of them, education
Mhm.
systems. Indian corporations invest in Western education. Like you see the donations which Indian corporations give to Harvard and other places. So, how do you think that the Indian education system, which is so far behind the nation, can cope up with that, or will it change?
Mhm. So, Aditya ji, a lot of our population is completely detached with the institutions that you are talking about. So when you say this classroom model system which the Britishers imposed all over the world, one of the objectives of coming up with this classroom model system, why Britishers imposed it in all of its colonies, is was the objective of churning out slaves for running factories, the industrialization factories which British Empire was looking at. So they wanted people to be stuffed within four walls for 15-20 long years, so that they are totally out of sync with the market realities and cannot enterprise at all. Because once you are stuffed within those four walls for 15-20 long years, and that too, if you look at the tool which is used in the classroom model, you are being told to focus on what you are not good at, if you realize the classroom model. And after those 15-20 years of investment, now the person is going to get trying to earn some money, and he has now no window left to try any kind of enterprising. Now the company which is hiring him, for the next 30 years of his life, that the HR fellow is trying to search what he is good at. Do you see how ironical this system is? And it is going to collapse on its own, because enterprising is something which is natural, and the job model is only for those people who are unable to learn the enterprising skills, and or they are physically incapacitated in some form or the other to do some kind of enterprising. Now, this was imposed by Britishers on all its colonies with the core objective that people don't question uh, those output of classroom, don't question the state, they don't question, they don't think about independence, they don't think about individual rights, and that is how, men and women both being looked upon as some kind of a unit of labor for these industrial factories. And they are, it's like a human trafficking to companies for jobs, that kind of a model. This is the British imposed model on the entire colonies world over. This is not just about India, it's about the entire world. So this is the form of education. Now, what form of education ancient India had was a Gurukul system in the Mandir campuses, where skills based education used to happen. And some of the concepts of the ancient India Gurukul system are recently being stolen, should I say, or taken over by some of the Western institutes, is what we call the student and faculty research exchange, which used to happen between university campuses in ancient India, between the Gurukuls. Um, some of the concept of entrepreneurship which are recently being copied from ancient India by the Western institutes is the concept of internship and articleship training. So the West is trying to ape and copy some of these ancient India stuff, but we are still not there. And which is why the entire content and structure which the current Indian system has is entirely a copy of the Western templates, which is why the rural India or the enterprising India the wise, the ones who carry the civilizational wisdom, still do not agree to any of these concepts which the Western copied institutions in India propagate. Which is why, you will still find 60-70% of the population still on the self-employment and enterprising mode, still functioning on that mode, because they actually don't believe that this Western system works. So when I see these foreign universities looking at India, trying to set up campuses in future in India, I believe uh, a lot of the ancient India wisdom is actually going to be transported back to the West via these uh, Ivy League institutes which are going to be established in India. It's actually going to be reversed. It's ancient India now going to tell the world, hey, what was going on was very temporary, short minded, and short term. This is what long term looks like. This is what vision looks like. And this is what education should look like.
See, in the global politics, and you're a student of Arthashastra, in the global politics, military plays a very major role. And India is buying military technologies left, right, and center from everywhere and developing their own too. All of them they're doing simultaneously. And I know it's a gargantuan task because you have to not only maintain the economy but also defend yourself. And most of the conflicts are created by the Western politics. We know that for sure. That more and more politics. I mean, the Twitter files is an excellent example what is coming out. And we are not talking anything conspiracy. We are just talking what is revealed so far. And all
Mhm.
the past communications of between the leaders and the media is all coming out. So it looks like the whole thing was a manipulation strategy by the West to contain actually just India, no other country. They didn't want to control China. They didn't want to control any other country because some countries were out of their control in any way, Soviet Union bloc. So how does that play? Like in if you look at the Mahabharata and other places in the Indian traditional values, the defense was the number one priority at one point of time, like few thousand years back. And defense is what invited lot of businessmen to us because they wanted to have a secure place. Defense, truth and justice system was very strong in India. In fact, Al Buruni talks about it, that if you want to get justice, go to India, do business in India. So India had that position at one point. So justice, defense, what are your comments? Like they also have to become strong in India to invite this kind of attention.
So the ancient India system or the model where the varnas that we talk about, where there is the Brahmins, there are Kshatriyas, there are Vaishyas, and there are Shudra. So these were the four categories of occupation or the Varna system that ancient India had, and each of them were very clearly linked to each other. Like say Brahmin, who's it's not just about birth in a Brahmin family. It is about what karma you do as a Brahmin, right? So if even after having a birth as a Brahmin, if you are not delivering the duties of a knowledge seeker or a knowledge giver person should have, then you are not a Brahmin, by the way. So the ancient India model was a more of a karma based structure of society, which was keen on prioritizing duties rather than rights, and where the Brahmins were the knowledge seeker and knowledge giving people who were not supposed to be inclined to a materialistic life, but they were to be dependent on their own security over the Kshatriyas, which is the second section. The Kshatriyas were very powerful, who were supposed to take and they can exert power. Uh, the king or the ruler is supposed to follow the Shastra Dharma, which is about defense. It's very important part of the Indian structure society, ancient India structure, and following Shastra Dharma meant that he as a has the duty and obligation to protect dharma with offense and defense, not just defense but also offense, right? So he had the power of weapons. He could execute that power, that particular section, but then he is not supposed to be inclined into again money making activities. For that, he was supposed to depend on the taxes collected from the third section of the society, which are called as Vaishyas. Now, the Vaishyas would take the risk, would get security from the Kshatriyas, but the Vaishyas is not supposed to exert power or use weapons, right? So this is how the entire society structure was distributed in a fashion where each section was dependent on the other section in a very beautiful way. And this is how the karmas defined how you operate, and not it was not about the birth. These are some kind of distortions and fake narratives which are being peddled, that by birth discrimination. This was not discrimination, right? So I believe that when India goes back to the Sanatan model of economics, by the way, that's the second book that I'm working on. Um, when India goes back or transitions from this current position to there, uh, automatically the kind of defense and this perspective of dharma will take prevalence over all other useless things that have gotten from the Western templates. Specifically because if you look at the ancient India structure of governance specifically, you will find that India lost out in front of the invaders with only one problem. And that problem was that India was the most modern society at that point in time, with complete autonomy to all the Janapada structure, Janapadas that we had in India. So it was like it's a basket or a bunch of different flowers. That was the kind of society India had become, wherein there was no central hold to hard power. I mean, the Janapada structure could not consolidate hard power for defense at the center, which is why we lost out to the invaders. So it was not that we were weak, or it is not that we were unknowledgeable or something like that. It was the problem was we were very modern in that day and age, that we had given so much liberties to the Janapada structure that the hard power could not be consolidated at the center. This is why we lost out in front of invaders. And beware, this particular government has the primitive, brutal nation state concept of the Western template right now. So the kind of power consolidation that we have of hard power right now in Delhi is astonishing. So if any enemy power is going to try any kind of a mischief with India, they are going to be beaten black and blue. So in terms of defense, you are going to have tremendous amount of hard power emanating out of Delhi, which means that we are looking at the entire Akhand Bharat region to become responsible for, which is going to extend from Saudi Arabia this side to Laos, Cambodia on the other, in terms of net security provision, which is why it makes total sense why United States defense companies want to come down to India.
Yeah, very fascinating answer. And I think a lot of discussions will start on this discussion of ours, actually, further discussion. Now, one last question, because I know you have to also go. The we are seeing the United Nations and getting irrelevant, and India throughout UN observers. You tweeted also, and from Kashmir, and some people or Indians were very happy. So in the if you look at the mass mindset of India, they are rejecting the Western education, like you said. They are questioning all the academics who are doing the copy paste job in India and not doing anything Indian as such or Vedic. But at the same time, we see that the West has stuck to its stance. So India doesn't get entry into Security Council. Jaishankar was very emphatic 2 days back when he said you're missing out 1.4 billion people. They're not part of the say now. So but they're sticking to the points. And even though they may verbally assure, okay, you will be included, but it's not going to happen because India is the only voice which stands against the Western mindset, complete mindset, because we have a diagonally opposite viewpoint. Chinese have that viewpoint, but they can't communicate. Russians are in a way pro-Western because they're already in that European. They consider themselves European more than Asian. So the so where does how does India get to these bodies of international bodies which are today's ruling? And I'm sure it will also go away because with the financial power that will also go away.
Mhm. So, Aditya ji, to be very frank and honest, this government in Delhi is not going to have that kind of patience, which wherein we are going to piggyback, we are going to again engage on reforms like serious. I don't think that dilly-dallying tactics is going to work with this government that sits. Nor does the young population, the massive young population in India, have that kind of patience anymore. So, which is why I believe that the moves have started to replace the United Nations relevance with other bodies, other equivalent bodies, which India sees as more democratic and more cooperative in terms of seeking reforms. Which is why the news that today I was seeing was going through was a Global South Summit. Now, this term which India is going to host this year, so when I see this terminology of global south being used, what that what that talks about is basically excluding the West. When you say global south, it means exclude the West. So I think December 2022 was the deadline to begin any kind of serious United Nations Security Council reforms and make India sit on the high table. The West has lost that opportunity now forever. And until 2028, there's a compulsory cooling period for India for the United Nations Security Council, even for the non-permanent membership, which means that United Nations is over. Over in the sense its relevance is totally now over. In the India won't now engage. I mean, specifically in 2022, you would have clearly observed that the Prime Minister of India, the President of Russia, and the President of China. All three gave a miss to the United Nations General Assembly in September in the United States. This is the first time all three together gave a miss to that event. And they downgraded it to the foreign ministers level, which means the foreign ministers of the three countries attended this particular event. Going forward, what I see is um, all three countries will now ask other counterparts and leaders to also not attend United Nations General Assembly. I think that's where it is heading. So the West has totally lost it. The last opportunity which it had to take India on board for some kind of a collaborative approach to where the world is moving towards. But the United States and UK did not show that kind of wisdom, which is why what is going to happen is they're going to be left out. Left out. Europe will be completely left out. United States would have some kind of relevance because of what it has at this point in time to offer to the world. But going forward, if the West does not understand that it has to move with the realities of 21st century and not drag its feet with the 18th century colonial mindset, then I think the Western population is the loser in this case.
We are talking all these things, but if you look at the ground American sentiments, they are still completely programmed to believe that they are the center of the universe and the whole world is dying to come to them. But and this is the mainstream view in the newspapers, in the TV shows.
Aditya ji, the countries laugh on the kind of indexes and reports which comes out from the West. People laugh at it. So I really I can't. I mean, it's just become like a joke. The United States State Department statements, the White House statements, and the statements coming out from the 10 Downing Street, they are totally out of sync with realities of the modern world.
And the academic viewpoint is even more hilarious, is that we are bringing culture, still continuing. It's not just ended. I know that when you switch off the fan, it keeps on moving for some time before it stops. So that it does happen.
Yeah.
But and United States is admitting 1 million legal immigrants and illegal, I don't even have a count because nobody knows the count actually. We are just estimating. So, I mean, so they're importing mass workers or people running from other countries, and approximately 250,000 Indians have also come through the southern border. That's what I was told. So, and they're demanding chapati, dal, and roti at the border. And yes, it is happening. There are a lot of Indian stores supplying them now. So, the when we look at this scenario of the Western delusion, and there are some intelligent people there, Jeffrey Sachs, and there are many people there who are trying to bring common sense, but nobody is listening to them. In fact, even our show, if a mainstream media artist, like Joe Rogan or any of those, I call them artists because if they hear, they'll say, oh, these are conspiracy theories, not the mainstream view, not a scientific view. They don't realize your background and my background. When we are talking from scientific perspective, real science, not the propaganda science. So
Mhm.
I think there has to be difference made there. So when you talk about the jobs which are being sold to Americans, minimum wage jobs are being sold right now, because high end jobs, they don't have the workforce because all that is occupied by Indians and Chinese. So
Mhm.
what is your view on the maybe the Americans will rise up and say, hey, we have been sold a short change, a propaganda machine, and where are we now? Because more and more people are going back to 70s movies. 90s movies have become more famous because they want to see what America looked like then. So, what is your view on that, on the social side impact?
Mhm. So, my reading is that once the fiat dollar collapses and the BRICS currency, which comes up, which is a commodities pegged currency that the BRICS Plus is going to launch in the world, uh, Asia and Gulf will say, hey, we can't be accepting a fiat dollar or a fiat euro as payments for our real goods or crude oil or energy. What happens next is the fate of all the unipolar dollar led bodies, IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, will be hanging, and they will have to begin negotiations on how trade is going to happen between pegged and the fiat currencies, or whether the fiat currencies should completely go, right? Once that starts trickling down to the masses in the West, what is going to happen is all the socialist freebies, which was possible because of endless printing of currencies, will suddenly vanish, which is 401k, retirement benefits, Medicaid, uh, income security, etc., etc. After which the Western masses would say, "Hey, we gave our cream jobs. We accepted a lot of Asians over here. We were very hospitable. We gave you good food, good nation, good climate. But hey, now you need to go back to your nation, because now we have to skill ourselves to that level and take the American jobs and give it in the hands of an American." So this is exactly what we are heading towards, where all the skilled jobs now US would like to give to the Americans, educate them properly, um, and the kind of temptation for the freebies which the government will not be able to issue anymore. So once that goes, the population will have to start working hard, start educating themselves to higher education, and take those higher skills and take fill in those slots of Asian immigrants, uh, and that is the way going forward. I think Americans will like to get back those slots of big paying jobs and big skills back from the immigrant Asians, and there are good chances of some kind of violence happening with uh, the skilled Asians in the West, because there will be a kind of sense of anger among the native Americans and the native Europeans that, hey, look, we gave you a lot, but this is what the Asia and Gulf has done to us as a country, because by not accepting fiat dollar, which is why we are losing all the government benefits now, and we have to actually work and actually study. So you got to go back to your nations. So a lot many of the NRI diaspora, I think, will pack their bags because I mean, the government might or the companies still might want to retain a lot of this talent, but the native population would clash with them on streets and frighten them to leave the West and go back to their nations. I think that's where it is heading towards. I've actually predicted riots already, and the year for Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, and California. So let's see.
So and also, it's a, anyone who is watching Indian Americans, you can take it very seriously, this one, because he has predicted everything accurately so far. So one last point, and before we end up the wrap up the show, the we have seen the riots against Japanese in the 70s. If you look at the history, Koreans against Chinese. It has not happened against Indians so far. It has started already because the more Indians were killed last year and before last year, and unfortunately that those things happen, and but there is a growing synergy between the native cultures and Indians also. Native Americans. I'm not talking about the European settler Americans. European settler Americans are just between 2 to 8 generations old, not more than that. Like nobody in America can be more than 10 generations old. It's not possible. Each generation is 30 years. So you cannot have 300 years of history. You cannot have more than 30 generations, 10 generations, actually. So, so 2 to 8 generations is most of the European immigrants are here, settlers. And people who have short memories can tell you, just 96 years back, Native Americans were given citizenship of America. So that was a big controversy during that time also, that it is our country, not you have no right to give. We have I mean, they claim that they have the right to give European citizenship, not the other way around. But it did happen. And so now that is a historical fact. Now, coming to what do you say about the rise of the Native Americans in the national say? What do you see?
So this has lot to do with the kind of economics which the fiat dollar has played in the last 50 years. So if if and when United States decides to repeg the dollar with real commodities, real production, gold or silver kind of precious metals, what is going to automatically happen is a lot of service sector jobs which were born, unrequired service sector jobs which were born with the 1971 unpegging of dollar from the gold standard, those jobs will vanish, which means that the Native American who are keen on indigenous method of trade, indigenous method of enterprising economy, will automatically gain prominence over urbanized America, which was a glamorized job role kind of a society, right? So the job loss is going to balance out the loss of face or the suppression of the Native Americans done by urbanized America, uh, and which is where the society would rebalance itself and the structure in terms of going towards a more traditional family value structure. I mean, you must have seen this data already, I guess, that a lot of children have started living with their parents because of the pandemic and the economic crisis. Now, this is only going to increase going forward because the entire debt based bubble is going to burst violently, which the reserve currency created as the rest of the world parked their savings in the United States. So, once that bubble bursts, what is going to happen is the people won't be able to have low rate interest loans, which means that they will automatically have to come down to a lifestyle of staying together with a family. Some of the jobs unrequired jobs of service sector would be gone, as I said, which again translates into the same thing, that they will have to live together with the family. The debt bubble will burst, which again translates into lesser role of credit cards in life, which again translates to the same thing, that they will have to live with the family. So the lot of European concepts of privacy and a splitting of nuclear family and family coming down to one cat and a dog, all those concepts are going to be questioned moving forward once the fiat dollar collapses, right? Because this has become unsustainable debt mountain for the US economy to now solve, in terms of almost a kind of a bankruptcy that this kind of a life spending model consumption life has created. So things will go down back to the traditional roles and traditional life and that kind of stuff.
It's even better. This discussion is even better than the last one. Every discussion is getting golden. So people should watch all the three. There'll be a playlist of Ankit Shah on the channel. You should watch all three of them, so you get the complete picture of what Ankit is saying. So Ankit, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And people should look for his books and book launches in Delhi. Will be in Delhi or somewhere?
Yep, yep.
Delhi.
Delhi.
So
Yeah.
look for his book launches, will be announced. We'll also retweet it if he announces it, and then you go there and get his books, because sometimes authors can only speak that much. There's a much more detail in the books. Like I tell about my books, because people don't ask me such questions. So I always wait for people to interview me, because in interviews I can tell more, but alone, how much can you speak? But there'll be much more detail in his books you can read, and let us know your feedback. It's time to re-educate yourself, and believe me, you have to focus on your own education than just hearing the propaganda education. So thank you so much, Ankit, and thank you all the
Thanks.
viewers for watching. Do share, like, subscribe. Let us know your feedback. Namaste.